Good evening, my fellow night owls. Welcome to another spine-tingling episode of Ms. Nightmare Official. These are real stories, told by those who lived them. When I first heard that faint whistle, I didn't think much of it. Our cabin was remote, and strange noises weren't uncommon in the woods. But the tone of that whistle was haunting, like something out of an old music box, slow and deliberate. I remember sitting upright in bed, every hair on my body standing on end. The sound came closer. I nudged my brother, trying to wake him, but he just mumbled and rolled over. My heart was pounding as I tiptoed to the window. Outside, the woods were pitch black, almost unnaturally so. I strained my eyes, but there was nothing. The whistling stopped. Relieved but uneasy, I climbed back into bed. Minutes later, it started again. But this time, it wasn't outside. It sounded like it was coming from within the cabin walls. The next morning, I told my dad. And while he tried to act nonchalant, I saw his knuckles tighten around his coffee mug. That night, we all went to bed early, and my dad stayed up with a shotgun by his side. At around 2 a.m., the whistling returned. It circled the cabin slowly, methodically, and then came the tapping. First, it was gentle, like a single finger against the wall. Then it became louder, insistent. My dad shouted, "Who's out there?" But there was no response. Just the sound of tapping and that haunting whistle. When the morning came, my dad opened the door to investigate. What we saw still chills me to this day. Bare footprints circling the cabin over and over, as though someone had been walking around all night. And then, just like that, the prints stopped, mid-step, as if the figure had vanished into thin air. We left that cabin 2 days later. My dad never spoke about it again. When I first moved into my new apartment, I was too excited to notice the odd little quirks. A flickering light here, a squeaky door there, it all seemed normal. But a few weeks in, the unsettling events began. One night, I came home from work to find the kitchen cabinet doors wide open. I distinctly remembered closing them before leaving. Maybe I'm just tired, I thought, brushing it off. But the incidents escalated. I'd wake up to find my dining chairs moved, arranged in a circle. Once, I even found my TV turned on to static at 3 a.m. That's when I heard the crying for the first time, soft, pitiful sobbing, coming from the corner of my bedroom. I froze. The room was dark, but I could feel it, the overwhelming sensation of someone watching me. I turned on every light in the apartment, but the sound disappeared. The next morning, I mentioned the strange occurrences to my landlord. His face went pale, and he hesitated before saying, "This apartment has history." He told me about the single mom and her little girl, how the mother had abandoned her, locking her in the apartment. By the time neighbors reported the smell, it was too late. That night, the crying returned, louder this time, and closer. I remember lying in bed, holding my breath as the sound moved from one corner to another. And then I saw her. She was small, maybe 8 years old, wearing a tattered dress. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken and empty. She stood at the foot of my bed, staring at me. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. She whispered, "Why did you leave me?" before vanishing into thin air. I moved out the next day. But even now, years later, I sometimes hear faint sobbing when I'm alone. When I was 17, I didn't scare easily. I loved horror movies and urban legends, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that weekend. It was late on a Saturday night, and my parents were out of town. I was home alone, binge-watching scary movies, laughing at how predictable they were. Around midnight, I heard a soft knock at the front door. I paused the movie, startled. Who knocks at this hour? I checked the peephole but saw nothing. Figuring it was a prank, I went back to the couch. Minutes later, the knock came again, but this time from the living room window. My stomach dropped. The curtains were drawn, but I could feel someone on the other side. I slowly peeked through the edge of the curtain, and that's when I saw him. A man, grinning from ear to ear, with teeth that looked like they hadn't been brushed in years. His eyes were wide and unblinking, fixed on me. I whispered, "Who are you? What do you want?" But he just stood there, his grin never faltering. Then he spoke, his voice a hoarse whisper, "I see you." I scrambled for my phone and called the police, keeping my eyes on him the entire time. The operator told me to stay on the line, but as soon as the sirens approached, the man was gone. The officers searched the property and found nothing except for a single greasy handprint on the window. But here's the part that still haunts me. When I looked closer, I realized the handprint wasn't on the outside. It was inside. To this day, I can't watch horror movies alone, because sometimes I think I still see him in my reflection. Let's start with a story from the subreddit r. Let's Not Meet. The Redditor, who we'll call Sam, shared an experience that still haunts him to this day. Sam was driving home late one evening after a long day at work. It was the kind of night where the fog wraps itself around your car and every shadow seems alive. He was about 10 minutes away from his house when he spotted something on the side of the road. A figure. Now, Sam was the type of person who always helped others when he could, but something about this person felt off. He couldn't see their face clearly, just the silhouette of someone wearing a hooded jacket. Against his better judgment, he slowed down and rolled down his window. "Need a ride?" he asked. The figure nodded, but said nothing. The hitchhiker got into the back seat. No words, just silence. Sam tried to make small talk, but the figure never responded. After a few minutes, he glanced in his rear-view mirror and froze. The seat was empty. Sam slammed on the brakes and got out of the car, his heart pounding. There was no sign of the hitchhiker. To this day, he refuses to drive that road at night. Let me know in the comments, would you have stopped for the hitchhiker? Or do you trust your instincts more than Sam did? This next story comes from Paranormal and will make you think twice about buying an old house. Our storyteller, Emily, thought she'd found her dream home. Turns out, she was not the only one living there. Emily moved into her new home, a charming old house built in the 1800s. From the very first night, she noticed odd things. Doors creaking open on their own, faint footsteps in the attic, and worst of all, whispers. Low, guttural whispers that seemed to come from the walls. At first, she tried to brush it off. Old houses make noises, she told herself. But one night, as she lay in bed, the whispers grew louder. They weren't random noises. They were words. Clear, chilling words. Get out. Emily decided to investigate. She hired a contractor to check the house for structural issues. What they found was far worse. Hidden within the walls was a small crawl space, and inside it were old belongings, journals, and photographs of a family who had mysteriously vanished in the 1930s. Emily moved out the next day. The house? It's still for sale if you're interested. A Okay, who's ready for the next story? Or should we take a little break? Just kidding. Let's keep going. This story comes from No Sleep, and trust me, it'll have you leaving the lights on tonight. A Redditor who we'll call Jake shared this experience from his childhood. It's the kind of story that sticks with you. Jake was 8 years old when he first saw it. A tall, shadowy figure that stood at the end of the hallway outside his bedroom. At first, he thought it was his dad checking on him, but when he called out, the figure didn't move. It just stood there, its outline darker than the shadows around it. Jake pulled the covers over his head, hoping it would go away. When he peeked out a few minutes later, it was gone. But this wasn't a one-time thing. The shadow appeared night after night, always standing in the same spot, always watching. Jake's parents didn't believe him, chalking it up to nightmares. But one night, his mom screamed. She had seen it too. The family moved out shortly after, but Jake says he still dreams about the shadow, standing at the end of the hall. All right, my night owls. That's all for tonight. Which story gave you the biggest chills? Let me know in the comments. And if you've had a terrifying experience of your own, feel free to share it. Who knows? It might just be featured in a future video. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and always stay in the light.